The night was unusually still at Blackwood Ridge. It was the kind of place local teenagers went to escape the prying eyes of their parents, a long, winding dirt road that ended at a cliff overlooking the sleeping town of Oak Haven. Mark and Sarah sat in Mark's old 1967 Chevy, the engine ticking as it cooled in the crisp night air. Outside, the forest was a wall of impenetrable shadows, with the moon providing only a ghostly, pale silver light that barely touched the ground. Inside the car, the world felt small and safe. The radio was playing a slow, fuzzy jazz station from the city, the static crackling like a dying fire. Sarah leaned her head against the window, watching the fog from her breath bloom and fade on the cold glass. She felt a strange unease, a prickle on the back of her neck that she couldn't explain. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the radio. Mark chuckled, though he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Hear what? It's just the wind, Sarah, or maybe a deer in the brush. Relax." But Sarah couldn't relax. The silence of the woods felt heavy, like it was pressing against the car doors, waiting for a crack to get in. The music on the radio suddenly cut out. For a moment, there was only the hum of empty air, and then a frantic news bulletin broke through. The announcer's voice was high-pitched, strained, with a sense of urgency that shattered the romantic atmosphere instantly. "We interrupt this program with an emergency bulletin from the state penitentiary. Convicted murderer Thomas the Butcher Vane has escaped the psychiatric ward. Vane is considered extremely dangerous. He is described as 6 feet tall, wearing a tattered gray jumpsuit. Please note, Vane is missing his right hand, which has been replaced by a sharpened steel hook. All residents in the Blackwood County area are advised to lock their doors and remain indoors until further notice." The radio clicked back to music, but the jazz now sounded discordant and mocking. Sarah's face went white. She reached for the door lock, clicking it down with a sharp snap. "Mark, we have to go, now," she said, her eyes darting to the side mirror. Mark groaned, though his face showed a flicker of fear he tried to hide with bravado. "Sarah, come on. That prison is 40 miles away. The chances of him being exactly here at this exact moment are 0. It's a big world out there." "I don't care about the chances," Sarah hissed. "I want to leave. I feel like someone is watching us." Mark sighed, reaching for the ignition, but before he could turn the key, the car rocked gently. It wasn't the wind. It felt like something heavy had leaned against the rear bumper. Then it started. Scritch, scritch, scritch. A sound like a dry branch dragging across a window, but it was rhythmic, deliberate. It started at the back of the car and slowly moved along the passenger side, the sound of metal being scored by something harder than steel. "Mark!" Sarah screamed, shrinking toward the center of the car. "Did you hear that? Something is out there!" Mark grabbed a flashlight from the glove box and shone it out the window. The beam cut through the darkness, hitting the thick trunks of the oak trees, but there was nothing there. Just the swirling mist and the deep, black shadows. "There's nothing there, Sarah. It's probably just a branch caught in the wheel well." "Branches don't move like that, Mark. Please, just start the car." Mark, now angry and shaken himself, turned the key. The engine roared to life, a violent intrusion into the quiet of the ridge. He slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the dirt, throwing gravel against the undercarriage. He didn't look back. He shifted into drive and floored it, the Chevy fishtailing as he tore down the winding dirt road toward the safety of the highway lights. The drive back to Sarah's house was silent. Mark drove 10 miles over the speed limit, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He was frustrated with the ruined night, frustrated with Sarah's panic, and frustrated with the nagging fear that he couldn't quite shake off. Sarah sat huddled against the door, staring straight ahead. She didn't look at the woods as they passed. She didn't look at the mirrors. She just waited for the familiar glow of her street lamps. When they finally pulled into her driveway, the porch light of her house felt like the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Mark killed the engine. The silence returned, but this time it was the safe silence of the suburbs. "Look," Mark said, his voice softer now. "I'm sorry I got snappy. It was just a scare. We're safe, see? No monsters, no hooks, just us." Sarah nodded, though her heart was still thumping against her ribs. "I know. I'm sorry I panicked. I'll see you tomorrow?" "Yeah," Mark said, reaching over to pat her hand. "I'll come around to open the door for you." Mark stepped out of the car. He walked around the front of the Chevy, the headlights still cooling with a faint metallic pinging sound. He reached for the handle of the passenger door to let Sarah out, but he stopped. His hand froze inches from the chrome handle. His jaw dropped, and a sound of pure, unadulterated horror escaped his throat, a strangled gasp that made Sarah's heart freeze. "Mark, what is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mark didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stepped back, pointing at the door handle with a shaking finger. Sarah leaned over and looked through the glass. There, hanging from the chrome handle of the passenger door, was a jagged, blood-stained steel hook. It was buried deep into the metal of the door, as if it had been ripped violently from a man's arm when the car had suddenly sped away. Small droplets of something dark and thick were still dripping from the tip of the hook onto the driveway. Sarah didn't scream. She couldn't. She simply looked up at the dark woods in the distance, knowing that somewhere back on Blackwood Ridge, a man with only one hand was standing in the road, watching the taillights disappear and waiting for the next car to arrive. The night was heavy, draped in a thick, suffocating blanket of rain that turned the world outside into a blurred mosaic of gray and black. It was the kind of night where the wind doesn't just blow, it moans, searching for cracks in the windows, whispering secrets to anyone brave enough to listen. Clara sat on a plush, velvet sofa in the center of a living room that felt too large for one person. This was the Miller estate, a glass and steel monument to wealth isolated on a hill miles away from the nearest neighbor. She was 19, a student who needed the money, and this job seemed like a gift. All she had to do was watch over 2 sleeping children for a few hours while the parents attended a gala in the city. At 8 o'clock, the Millers had disappeared into the rain in their silver sedan, leaving Clara with a list of emergency numbers and a silence so profound it made her ears ring. For the first hour, Clara tried to study, but the house wouldn't let her. Every house has its own language of creaks and settles, but this one sounded different. It sounded like it was breathing. The grandfather clock in the foyer marked the seconds with a heavy, metallic thud that echoed through the hallways. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each sound felt like a hammer hitting a nail. It was 9:45 p.m. when the first vibration broke the rhythm of the clock. Clara's phone slid an inch across the glass coffee table. The screen glowed a ghostly white, illuminating the dark corners of the room. Private number. She answered with a polite, practiced voice. "Hello, Miller residence?" There was no reply, at least not a vocal one. All Clara could hear was the sound of air moving, a heavy, rhythmic breathing as if someone had just finished running a marathon and was now standing right behind her. "Hello?" she repeated, her voice smaller this time. "Mr. Miller, is that you?" A voice finally broke the silence. It wasn't Mr. Miller. It was a raspy, sandpaper-dry whisper that sounded like it hadn't been used in years. "Have you checked the children?" The line went dead. Clara stared at the black screen of her phone. Her heart gave a sharp, painful tug in her chest. A prank call. It had to be a prank. Someone from her university probably knew she was babysitting out here in the middle of nowhere and wanted to scare the city girl. She forced a laugh, but it died in her throat. She looked toward the grand staircase. The second floor was a cavern of shadows. The lights were off to keep the children asleep, and the darkness up there felt thick, almost liquid. She didn't go up, not yet. Instead, she walked around the ground floor, checking the locks. Front door, bolted. Side door, locked. Large French doors leading to the patio, secured. As she moved through the house, she turned on every light she could find. The mansion began to glow like a lighthouse in the storm, but instead of feeling safer, Clara felt exposed, like a bird in a glass cage, visible to anything lurking in the woods outside. She returned to the sofa, pulling her knees up to her chest. She tried to focus on her textbook, but the words blurred into meaningless shapes. Then, the phone vibrated again. Her heart skipped a beat. Her thumb hovered over the accept button. She wanted to ignore it, but the fear of not knowing was worse than the fear of answering. "Listen," she snapped into the receiver, her voice trembling. "I've already traced this. If you call again, the police will be at your door in 5 minutes. Leave me alone." The laughter that came back was low and hollow. "The police? They won't make it in time, Clara." Her blood turned to ice. He knew her name. "Why haven't you gone upstairs?" the voice whispered. "They look so peaceful when they aren't screaming. Why don't you go up and see for yourself?" Clara's breath hitched. Her lungs felt like they were filled with lead. Without hanging up on the stranger, she used the house's landline to call the emergency operator. Her voice was a jagged whisper as she explained the situation. "Stay on the line," the operator commanded, her voice a steady anchor in Clara's sea of panic. "I am tracing the source of the incoming calls to your cell phone. Just keep him talking if he calls back. Are the doors locked?" "Yes," Clara whimpered, clutching the receiver so hard her knuckles turned white. "Everything is locked. I'm alone. I'm all alone." Suddenly, the house's silence was shattered. Upstairs, directly above her head, came a dull, heavy thud. It was followed by the sound of something wet being dragged across the hardwood floor. The phone in her hand vibrated again. The stranger was calling back. "Clara." The operator's voice suddenly turned sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. "Clara, listen to me very carefully. We have traced the calls. They aren't coming from outside. They are coming from the secondary landline in the master bedroom." Clara's heart stopped. "What? No, that's upstairs." "Get out of the house," the operator screamed. "The intruder is in the house with you. He is upstairs. Get out now." Clara didn't scream. She couldn't. Her body acted on pure, primal instinct. She bolted toward the front door, her socks sliding on the polished floor. As she reached for the deadbolt, she made the mistake of looking back. At the top of the grand staircase, a door creaked open. A sliver of light from the hallway illuminated a tall, shadow-drenched figure standing on the landing. In one hand, he held a phone. In the other, something long and metallic that glinted in the dim light. He wasn't wearing a mask, but his face was obscured by a darkness that seemed to move on its own. He didn't run. He simply stepped onto the first stair, his eyes locked onto hers. Clara ripped the front door open and dove into the freezing rain, screaming for help at the top of her lungs. She ran until her chest burned, until she saw the flashing blue lights of the police cruisers tearing up the driveway. When the police searched the house, they found the children, unharmed but deeply asleep, drugged with a sedative. In the master bedroom upstairs, the window was wide open, the curtains fluttering in the storm. On the nightstand lay a butcher knife and the house phone. But it was what they found on the floor that haunted Clara for the rest of her life. Next to the children's beds were two small, hand-carved wooden dolls that hadn't been there before. And written in lipstick on the hallway mirror were 5 words. "Thank you for watching them." In June of 1972, a woman appeared in the emergency room of Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. To see someone in a blood-soaked white gown in an ER is not unusual, but there were two things that caused the witnesses to vomit or faint in pure terror. First, she wasn't exactly human. She resembled something closer to a mannequin, but with the fluidity and grace of a living creature. Her face was as smooth as polished porcelain. No eyebrows, no pores, no blemishes. Her features were perfectly symmetrical, but frozen. She had a face, but she had no expression. Second, she had a kitten clamped between her teeth. Its blood ran down her white dress and onto the sterile linoleum floor. She didn't swallow, she didn't chew. She simply stood there, staring into nothingness with vacant, glassy eyes. The medical staff, though paralyzed by an instinctive, primal fear, managed to lead her to a private room. She offered no resistance. She was as limp as a doll. As they cleaned the blood from her face, they realized she wasn't wearing a mask. That soulless, plastic-like surface was her skin. She remained silent and motionless for hours. The doctors decided that sedating her was the best course of action until the authorities could arrive. They moved her to an operating table. Throughout the entire process, she didn't blink once. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the ceiling lights, reflecting the fluorescent glow like two dark mirrors. Dr. Aristome, the lead surgeon on duty, approached her with a syringe. He was a veteran of the ER, a man who had seen the worst horrors humanity could inflict, but his hands were shaking. As he leaned over her, she finally moved. She didn't struggle, she didn't scream. She simply turned her head toward him and did something that would haunt the staff for the rest of their lives. She smiled. As her lips parted, the doctors gasped. Her mouth was not filled with human teeth. Instead, it was packed with long, needle-sharp spikes of bone, too many of them to fit in a human jaw. They were serrated and glinted like chrome under the surgical lights. Dr. Aristome stepped back, the syringe falling from his nerveless fingers. "What the hell are you?" he whispered. The woman didn't answer with words. She leaned forward, her neck stretching at an impossible angle, and whispered directly into his ear. Her voice wasn't a voice at all. It was the sound of static and grinding metal. "I am God." In a flash of movement too fast for the human eye to follow, she lunged. The sound of tearing flesh and breaking bone filled the small room. The security guards outside heard a single, strangled cry before the heavy doors swung open. The woman stepped out into the hallway, her white dress now completely crimson. Dr. Aristome was found slumped against the operating table, his throat missing. The other nurses were found in corners of the room, their eyes wide with a shock that had stopped their hearts. The woman walked calmly toward the hospital exit. Every person she passed was paralyzed by her gaze, that blank, porcelain stare and that mouthful of needles. She vanished into the Los Angeles night and was never seen again. To this day, the staff who survived that night refuse to speak of her. They only refer to her as the expressionless. And some say that if you look too closely at the mannequins in a store window late at night, you might just see one of them blink.